I talk about examples like this, when I talk about the First Amendment, people will say, oh, wait a minute, that's protected. It's protected by the First Amendment. And I think that we have an idea that in the First Amendment there is an exhaustive section about what you can and cannot say. I have spent, since I was around when they wrote the thing, I have spent a lot of time studying First Amendment as it pertains to speech and press. And I keep a copy in my wallet of exactly what it covers. I'm sorry, that's a postage stamp. This is what it says in the Constitution. Could you read that?
For abridging freedom of speech or of the press.
That's it. Okay, that's 10 words. The whole First Amendment is 45 words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievance. That is it. And it doesn't exactly mean what it says. Is it true? No law against free exercise of religion. I want to start carnalism. And I want to practice human sacrifice. And I've got some candidates. Okay? Can I do it? No, the government will stop. I want to have a demonstration in favor of carnalism. And I want to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. Can I do it? Well, I guess if I get a permit. But the problem is that when we talk about constitutional issues, they become complex because they are decided by custom, by court decisions, by overturned court decisions, and by Supreme Court decisions eventually that make rulings that we begin to start all over again when we get back into a new technology. In terms of what people can say on social media, we have a double, triple, quadruple, quintuple standard. Government employees actually have more freedom in many ways to post on social media because they are given some protections in terms of how they can express themselves being a part of government. However, if they say things that are a direct attack on their bosses, they're out of luck. Private individuals have people who work for private organizations generally are at-will employees, meaning that they can be fired at will. However, they have some protections too in what's called concerted speech, meaning things about issues like that have to do with labor. It's a National Labor Relations Act. If you are posting about, there was a case where someone posted about alleged safety violations in their workplace. They were fired, they posted it on Facebook, and they were reinstated and given an award because it was ruled that this was something of direct public impact that was protected by the concerted speech clause of the National Labor Relations Act. Okay, now, if your eyes are swimming and your brain is all confused, that's where we stand today. We have other issues we haven't even begun to address legally, socially, ethically, like, is there a statute of limitations on stupid stuff? My God, if people kept track of what I did when I was 17, I'd be in Alcatraz by now. It's closed, but they'd open it up again to put me into it. But now we have the internet, which is a mirror with a memory. It never forgets. So what do we do in cases like that? We seem to be at a loss, and we seem to look at cases that vary from case to case, and what are the rules? Well, I don't know. Things that vary from case to case really aren't rules. So I guess my first question would be this. How is it that this very sophisticated legal system, political system, just seems all in a hash, all Chicken Little-esque, when we're trying to figure out how to handle a new type of technology? And Dr. Butler, you have a background in political science, you study societal change. Could you give us some indication why we can't figure out what we're doing?
Sure, absolutely. Can everybody hear me okay?
Can you use the mic?
I'm trying to avoid using the mic. Can everybody hear me okay? Or do I need to use the mic? Okay, good. Okay. I think there's really very good reason for everybody to be baffled because there are a lot of unanswered questions about free speech today, particularly with respect to social media. And there's some very good reasons why. Let's think about this for a second. The First Amendment was written 230 years ago. Social media has been around for only a decade or so. Let's think about what the fundamental nature of speech was when the Bill of Rights was crafted. So there were real limits on speech. For example, no amplification. So your voice would only travel as far as it went. The only way speech would be recorded is if somebody wrote it down. And so the only way it could be distributed was by word of mouth, or if it were printed. But if it were printed, that would be expensive, and distribution would still be really slow because you didn't have modern transportation. It would be horseback is the fastest way for it to travel around. So if we think about that conception of what speech is and compare it to what we have now with social media. Social media is accessible to almost anyone. So nearly anyone can post, can speak on it. It is instantly recorded, and it is permanent. And the other thing about it is that any speech that you put on it is findable by others. So if you're thinking of speech in that context, there are some questions that it raises about society and free speech that we didn't even have to think about back when the Bill of Rights was created. So for example, two questions really. Who can look for your speech? And when they find it, what can they do with it? Those are fairly recent questions that we as a society have had to start grappling with, and so we haven't yet settled on an answer. I think there's one other thing that's important to talk about in terms of large changes, and that is changes in recent decades in terms of what is socially acceptable to say and do. We have been going through a large change in this respect, and I think that is also currently unsettled, and that makes a difference in terms of creating this sort of bafflement. So for example, things that used to be perfectly acceptable a few decades ago, or even a decade ago, are now deemed to be terribly offensive, and people who say them or do them are scorned. So that creates two other questions that we are grappling with, and as a society have not decided the answer. First, what is socially acceptable to say and do? I don't think the answer to that is generally determined, at least not across the entirety of the nation. And the second is, what are we to make of people who did or said things that were perfectly acceptable at the time, but which are now deemed to be socially to be offensive? How are we to treat that, and how are we to think about people in that respect? So, given those big fundamental questions, I think people are right to be baffled, and it is a difficult terrain for you all to be operating in.
Ms. Thompson-Taylor, you're right with